Welcome to the Real Clear Investigations Podcast. I'm RCI's editor, J. Peder Zane, joined as always by RCI senior reporter, James Varney. Hey, Jim, how you doing?
Hello, Peder. Doing good.
This week, we are excited to welcome Susan Crabtree, who's a reporter with RealClearPolitics, who's written a terrific new book about California called Fool's Gold. And she'll be joining us in a little bit. Before we get going, I want to remind you that you can not only watch this episode at our website, but you can also listen to it on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and other places where you get your podcasts. So check that out. And of course, you can see it on YouTube as well. So usually we spotlight the best in investigative journalism. But this week, we're going to take a little bit of a turn and talk about some stories that we thought that there were some problems in. And we'll begin with one of the biggest stories of the week, and that was the federal grand jury that returned an indictment involving wire fraud and money laundering against the Southern Poverty Law Center. And this story, of course, is of interest because that money payments were connected to basically $3 million that they seem to have paid members of hate groups and an organizer of the Unite the Right march in Charlottesville. So the very people that they were supposedly targeting and controlling and exposing, they were also paying, right, Jim?
Yeah, and this isn't the first time that we've seen some red flags with the Southern Poverty Law Center. Its founder, Morris Deese, was fired a few years ago when it turned out he was like a serial sexual harasser. There was some workplace issues that were going on there. And this time, what we've seen is that everybody seems to be rushing to the organization's defense. When I say everybody, I mean in the media. And I think it's because obviously it's stated intent at the SPLC, right, that we're going to root out hate and the Klan and the whole idea of the Klan in the Deep South where I am. That's an honorable thing, right? I think everybody's behind that. But it has morphed into something completely different. It's a fabulously wealthy charity, and they have been simply going around for the last several years trying to run conservative groups up the flagpole for very little reason. You might remember somebody went into I think it was the Family Research Council and shot some people up, and it was because he said he saw the SPLC and identified them as a hate group. So now you've got these indictments, like you said. And the questions also are not only about the organization, but why are the people defending it here? The SPLC isn't the FBI. They don't return
so the argument, the argument was that the SPLC was paying informants who would then give them dirt on these hate organizations.
Or post hate stuff on social media.
And what was interesting about that is that how so many legacy media places, USA Today and others, all seized on that same argument at the same time, which seems hard for people to just come up with on their own everywhere. So there's this messaging machine that seems to tell these people what to say. Of course, the SPLC is not law enforcement. So when the FBI, and there are a lot of problems we know with the FBI using confidential informants to rig cases, like we probably saw in Michigan with the Gretchen Whitmer alleged kidnapping. But at least the FBI can at some point go arrest people. Mm-hmm. And I think the other point that you get to about how much money this group has, the Washington Free Beacon and others have pointed out that they take in and spend about $129 million a year, but they have a nest egg assets of $800 million.
Yeah, they're rich.
And one of the ways that which is weird for a charity to have so much money that it doesn't spend on its good works, but one of the ways that they raise money is by raising the alarm about extremism and white supremacy. And we know, you've seen probably those charts that people have done about in the New York Times and other places, the use of the terms white supremacy, racism, how they all exploded after 2010. You know, this was not an issue until it was. And it was then an issue that the SPLC, the more people thought there was hate and white supremacy, the more money they raised. And so I think our critique is not that somebody can't say, well, they maybe had a reason for spending this money, but the total lack of curiosity about the deeper things that these people were doing to feather their own nests. And in addition to that, as Data Republican pointed out in a terrific thread of tweets, this, especially the Charlottesville Unite the Right March in 2017, has been such an animating event for the left. And it turns out that SPLC was paying somebody who was involved in the organization of that is pretty incredible.
Yeah, and they were also, I think they helped pay to bring people there. And so what you've seen with the defense and some of these stories that we're talking about, it's like the old Monty Python thing where the Navy captain says, and I'd like to address these reports about cannibalism in the Royal Navy. And I want to say that there is no cannibalism in the Royal Navy. And when I say no cannibalism, I mean there is some cannibalism. And it's just like that. It's like when they aren't doing this. And when I say they're not doing that, they are doing some of that, but not so much. And like you were talking about the Unite the Right, remember the allegation, which was a lie, that Trump said there were fine people on both sides, meaning the Nazis and the skinheads, who he said should be condemned totally. But that lie has been really the cornerstone of the whole idea that Trump is this wild racist. And it was repeatedly what Joe Biden said was the reason for him running for president in 2020.
Right. And I've always said that it may be that the president was completely misinformed, that in fact, they all were neo-Nazis and hate group members. So there were no fine people. But that's not what he understood. He understood that there were people who were defending the statues.
Right.
And yes, and it was used in a completely unfair way. So another story that was we sort of making the rounds this week was the New York Times profiled some USAID workers who have lost their jobs when Trump, as we famously remember, and Doge, that whole thing, he just kind of erased this organization. And tell us a little bit about some of the people that they profiled in that piece, Jim.
Okay, so USAID, like you just said, got pretty much X'd out last year with Doge. And I'd be the last person to mock someone who lost their job because I lost my job. I've been laid off and I know it's brutal. So there is a part of me that really feels for these people. But the Times story was, really shedding heavy tears over people that were making like $270,000 a year or $175,000 a year. And there was one woman, I think she was making $270,000, and her husband was working at some nonprofit funded by USAID. They don't tell us how much money he was paid. So it seems like these people had awfully good gigs for a long time. I don't know why they are in such dire financial straits now after that. And the Times story also it completely elides the point. It just has one graph in it where it acknowledges that it says, I think the word is much of the money that USAID had was really spent in Washington. So in other words, we had taxpayer money funding this giant constellation of USAID and NGOs and nonprofits, and not as much money going to fight AIDS in Africa, which is what you always hear, right? Like if we get rid of USAID, millions of people are going to die and children in Africa are going to get AIDS and all. And I don't think that's true.
Right.
But this specific story about these people, it seemed to me to be a little tone deaf in the sense of everybody reading it going, they were making $270,000 a year?
Right. And they were, yeah. And not, I mean, I think to your point, that paragraph, there's a single paragraph in this story about these people. And by the way, they were making all this money. They had been there for years, most of the people they profiled, and now they can't find jobs. And that woman who was making $272 is now making $19 an hour at a Pensie's. And so I don't know anything about her. I know how tough the job market is, but it's like you would think that somebody with highly skilled international experience could get a better job. So I don't know. They don't raise the question of were these people overpaid to begin with?
Mm-hmm.
But the more crucial point is there's a single paragraph in this story, as you allude to, that says they admit there was waste and abuse. All of these people who work there say this, and that much of the money was just funneled from the government to these organizations to other Washington contractors. And this is a larger thing we're going to get into with Susan Crabtree in a little bit, this sort of NGO industrial complex, where, as you've said about the New Orleans schools, I think they're not there to serve students, they're a jobs program for teachers.
Right.
And this seems to be a classic case of, an organization that really deserves scrutiny because it was not delivering on its mission, unless its mission was to provide good salaries to the people who were working there and other organizations that they were involved with.
Yeah, spending a ton of money. And, I remember going to the USAID headquarters before I became a foreign correspondent to talk to people. And I've worked with them in Honduras and other countries, and some of them were doing really, I thought, admirable stuff. But the whole place was just weird. Like in the lobby, they had carved into granite, as if it was Abraham Lincoln, stuff from Hillary Clinton. I was like, why? That Hillary Clinton, she was like maybe a senator at that time, but it was like the Jefferson Memorial. And I thought, there's something about this whole thing that seems to me wasteful. And now we find that it probably was. And I do feel bad for those people, but I can understand why taxpayers are like, we don't want to pay for this.
Right. And I think that it also, this is a great segue into our discussion with Susan Crabtree, both with the SPLC and USAID. It's the issue is not that they weren't doing good work.
Mm-hmm.
It's that the questions about what they were doing were ignored largely by the mainstream media. And so, you want to both look at extremist groups and have it in good context. It sounds like the SPLC went way overboard because it was a good fundraising thing for them. The USAID, maybe if they had looked at what they were doing and the effectiveness of it, and that, the grants were actually going to do the work that it was supposed to, they wouldn't have gotten the axe. But instead, that's all ignored in this system in which, and let's be honest, the Washington reporters all live amongst these people. They're all their friends. There's not a huge interest in going after them. And also, their stated mission. I remember I was telling you, Sidney Hook always said that, especially for progressives, the end result is all that matters to them, the idea of what they want to accomplish. And the difficulty of getting there, or the impossibility, is much less important. And so if you're like, well, we're fighting AIDS in Africa, okay, good. That's a good thing. But that's not, how are you doing that? What is the process is, and that all gets lost in the great goal. And that is also, it seems like, one of the major problems in California, which is, of course, one of the great progressive states in this country, that also seems to fail in its policies on almost every metric of what they're trying to do, whether it's educating their children, whether it's helping the homeless, whether it's delivering healthcare, whether it's having fair and transparent government. And that is the theme of Susan Crabtree and Jed McFatter's wonderful book, Fool's Gold. And I'll read the
Hi, Susan.
Hey there. Hey, Peder. Hey, James. Well, we like to say that, people did know mostly about the failed policies, not all the failed policies, but we were focused on corruption in the state before corruption in California was cool. So, now everybody, Nick Shirley and every other person, the Manhattan Institute, everybody's coming to town because Gavin Newsom's running for president and they want to avoid that. Well, we were doing this because as a Californian, native Californian, as you know, I spent 23 years in Washington, D.C. on the front lines of covering Congress, every day up there, sitting outside of meetings. Then I went to the White House briefing rooms back and forth from Congress to the White House. And I came to California because I wanted to raise my child here. I missed the landscapes. I missed the outdoor recreation. And my childhood was idyllic here. My dad was military, and my mom was a teacher. He went on to work for the B2 program at Northrop, and it was a lively program back then. And there was a lot of, obviously, aviation in the area. And we lived, unlike some people who claim to be upper middle class, we really were upper middle class with that kind of income coming in. And, we had a pool. I mean, we weren't going to Europe on vacations, but we were, upwardly mobile.
Right.
And
The
I
good
felt
life,
like,
the dream, the
right,
California dream.
we were living the California dream, and my parents were confident that their children could remain in California and live the California dream, pursue their own goals. If we had education and we did everything right. So coming back in 2017, it was radically different. I took my family, my young daughter at the time, down to downtown San Diego, and Horton Plaza was this beautiful place growing up, just 80s double-decker
Right.
mall, state of the art.
Yeah.
It was all boarded up. There were homeless people everywhere. And we were going down for a sandcastle competition. Thought was like very wholesome. We had to cross through this homeless encampment, and the people were in squalor. And it was horrifying to me. And then there was a hepatitis outbreak,
Oh my
and
God.
it killed 17 people. Then we had these waves of fires, right? I thought it was like some kind of third world situation. Why are we complacent in allowing these fires to? One day I walked outside and the sky, I wasn't even near the fires at the time. It was more up in LA. And the sky was like, it was, red dawn. Basically, it was, the sky was brown and the sun was penetrating through red. And I thought, all these environmentalists in California, and they improved the smog situation. They have all these rules about we're going to all EVs in 2035. And this is doing more damage to the environment than any of those. The UCLA and Stanford did studies. These wildfires back in the 2017 and those years wiped out all of the carbon improvements that their EV mandates had made over the last decade.
Wow.
So
So
it's just
Susan,
ridiculous
so
what was
you
going on.
basically you do what a journalist does. So you notice something, your own experience, and then you're like, is this true for other people? Like, I'm seeing this, so I want to explain it, and I also want to see, how is this happening? Is my perception true and whatever? So how did you then move from noticing that something was different and wrong to what did your reporting then tell you about your observations?
My reporting was telling me that there was no accountability in California. And the fourth estate was, basically it was all access journalism, and they were an extension of the problem. Back in DC, people say the legacy media dominates, and that is true. But there were other outlets, obviously Fox, a number of different outlets, Washington Examiner, where I worked prior. That's not the case in California at the time. Now we have some new outlets coming here, California Post, but it was dominated by the left media in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and even in San Diego. And San Diego Union Tribune has gone completely left. So I just thought, what? My neighbors didn't know why their electricity rates were going up. They didn't know why these are people that are educated at Stanford, at Harvard, work for Qualcomm. They didn't know why that they couldn't drop their insurance. And the wildfires have made it impossible to change your insurance. You might lose your insurance. And these are basic, necessities of life. And California was just going downhill. And then we saw the COVID. I lived through COVID here, and the mandates. They were arresting surfers, and
Famous
and it was
photo.
just unbelievable. The lockdown policies, letting liquor stores stay open, and churches were all shut down, and then you saw the French Laundry situation, and there's an arrogance among the politicians here because they don't think they're going to get caught.
Can I ask you a question about the media? Just one quick thing, because we just were talking about a New York Times story on USAID, and they had one paragraph that told you the truth about all of these problems in the agency, surrounded then by 50 other paragraphs that gave you different stories. So are you saying that like the LA Times and the San Diego paper just ignored this stuff? Or is it that they would sporadically do a piece that our schools we have the highest unemployment rate in the country, we have some of the worst schools, our homeless problem, we spend billions of dollars and it's getting worse? Just tell us a little bit about how the media, because they couldn't have completely ignored all this stuff, right?
Right. It was sporadic. There is a really good publication called Cal Matters. It is towards the left a little bit, but the people in California have changed the way they consume news. So no one is reading a paper on a daily basis. I will say myself and people in the industry, but educated people aren't reading papers on a daily basis. They're getting it through social media another way, and they're getting siloed information. So, and that's true for the whole country. It's exceptionally true for California because, we're not a government town. Everybody's doing different things. They're in biotech. They're really consuming their news that's important to them. So then they hear, what the politicians are saying, and it gets amplified.
Right.
So that's what's going on. And we don't know your community news. Hardly anybody reads a community newspaper out here anymore. So the issues that are affecting you, it's like the frog in the boiling pot. Wait a second, my insurance rates are going up. What's happening here? And you don't see the incremental step and tell you that you're already cooked.
One of the things that I thought, Susan, when I was reading the book, it's kind of an indictment of Gavin Newsom, essentially. But you mentioned some of the history that's gone on. I was covering the New Orleans Saints like 12, 14 years ago. And as we were nose up coming back to New Orleans, I turned to the guy, my colleague next to me, and the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle was all about how the train system in Spain, and they had sent people to Spain, which was supposedly, the electric rail from San Francisco to Los Angeles, the big project at the time, and still. And they said, it's never turned a profit. People don't ride it. It's a farce. And I said to my friend, this is going to kill the train in California, which is clearly a boondoggle. 12 years later, here we are. You mentioned in your book that it needs another $100 billion and $7 billion more just to lay the first track. And that predates Newsom when that thing was born. How is it that these type of crazy projects that have no purpose and cost fortunes just continue in California?
Well, I think it's the union power in California. They're creating union jobs from that, the highway, the high-speed rail to nowhere. I rode past it on my way to my aunt's house recently, and there it is in Merced, the hot spot, metropolis of Merced, California. I'm joking. It stops this big concrete path. And, I've been covering the high-speed rail to nowhere for a long time. I actually would be excited about it. I love train travel. If you go on the Amtrak here, it's a ghost town most days. It's improving, but I love the train, and nobody rides it here in California. You have to change the culture, and it starts in Los Angeles. the transportation problem in Los Angeles. If environmentalists were serious, they would solve the transportation problem in Los Angeles. If you go from Grand Central Station on the train and try to get to Pepperdine, which I've tried to do, it's like going to heaven, you going to hell to get to heaven. I mean, it is just a horrible. It's all the jokes are true. And, I just
Is it
don't.
just a green religion, though? Like, why can't they take this out in the sunlight and drive a stake through its heart? Because it's clearly ridiculous.
It's absolutely that LA's traffic is absolutely ridiculous for anybody to claim they're an environmentalist and be a politician in LA is beyond me. But this is like, it's almost like there's this virtue signaling that's going on, but in terms of getting the jobs done, it doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
So
it just continues.
it's more about the virtue signal of trying to be a leftist. I'm going to be more far left. You have Mia Bonta now saying she wants an attorney for every illegal immigrant. And we've already provided $1 billion, as I write in my piece with Chris Rufo this past week, to immigration services nonprofits. How farther left are we going to go in California when the policies are failing at every turn? I had homelessness, $24 billion. We tried to get our it's an unemployment system during COVID. That was $40 billion. You see all this hospice fraud. They shut down 500 hospices in LA. The federal government did just in the last week. And some of them were operating out of burrito stands in LA.
Yeah.
I mean,
you talked about there was a gubernatorial debate this week. And you were talking on social media and elsewhere about it, as others were, and the grades they were giving Newsom for homelessness. The homeless problem has just gotten worse, and they have spent tens of millions of dollars, and it seems to be their only answer is to continue to throw money at it. So much like the train, I don't understand why nobody in California says enough and stops it. I don't understand how these things just seem to be eternal.
People are voting with their feet in California, and they can no longer afford to live here. They're leaving. There's a mass exodus, even though Gavin Newsom says, oh, it's not true. Well, he's letting in so many illegal immigrants that it makes up for the population exodus of middle class and struggling middle class. So you don't become homeless in California. The problem, what I'm finding, I'm diving in now to the homelessness problem. I've looked at some of the fraud there, and there's no regular accountability. I talked to, I have Secret Service sources who have specialized in banking and banking law, finance law. They go on to different companies, Fortune 500 companies, and do this for a living. He says, basic accounting measures were not practiced. So these homeless nonprofits say they have $65 million in the bank to work on these projects, and no one's checking them. The banks aren't checking them. The LA Housing Authority isn't checking them, and Gavin Newsom's not making sure that's happening. It's his home key project. It's his signature homelessness shelter project, turning hotels into homeless shelters. But there's been so much fraud just in that system because basic checks and balances aren't applied.
So one of the things that, I really enjoyed about the book, I mean, it was sad, but how you talked about, again, the progressive ideals. And so on paper, they sound very good. We want to get homeless people off the street and into residences to move them into permanent housing. We want to take care of the health of everybody who's living here. Okay. And what you sort of, in describing the failures of these policies, you also use a term that a guy who writes for us, Joel Kotkin, he writes for Real Clear Investigations, neo-feudalism. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things that, the Nick Shirleys and whatever just show you the lack of accountability in the spending, that it's like, how are they sending, millions of dollars to a burrito stand that's saying it's doing something? So there's no oversight. But there also is this larger web of, as we said with the USAID, these NGOs that employ a lot of people who then have tremendous power to then direct donations, direct jobs to people who support the politicians. And so can you talk a little bit about both, the organizations that get this money, and also, which was just amazing to me, was the rampant fraud. All of these people who then have given money to Newsom and Harris and others who've all ended up in jail. I mean, there's also...
we have a story coming out about that. Jed McFatter has done a lot of research, great research on that, and we were tracking it as we were doing the book. We should have put it in the book, but it would be another chapter. So these NGOs, these nonprofits, I spent my whole weekend, 10 hours every day on the weekend, re-adding up all of the grants line by line that go to them. And it's just mind-boggling. 25 million for homeless services. It's really interesting to the CHIRLA, Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights. That's at the center of the web of the immigration issues in California, immigration services issues. They also, Senator Hawley also is investigating CHIRLA for whether they contributed to the riots in LA last year. They say they didn't. It's all nonviolent. But what's going on here is they're providing legal aid to keep criminals, illegal immigrants writ large, and then even the criminal element of the illegal immigrants, because they have a merit-blind policy of representing people. Everybody should have a lawyer, due process. Right. But they're saying it's constitutional. But is it constitutional for non-citizens to have legal aid provided by taxpayers? It's to the tune of, $400 million just on the legal aid alone. And what I discovered when you drill down into it, just last year, the state legislature finally said enough is enough of this legal aid going to keep felons in our neighborhoods. If you're a felon, even under California's super sanctuary laws, you're supposed to be handed over to ICE. That's supposed to be an automatic see you later card.
Right.
That's not true now. And we have in San Diego County alone, 65 serious felons that our taxpayer dollars has gone to keep in our neighborhoods. And that's including drug traffickers, murderers, rapists, you name it. And that's just in the last 2 years.
So you basically have organizations that are progressive. So they have an ideal of what they want to do, that some people can say this is a good thing to provide these services to people, but they become entrenched. They often become corrupt. They then, as with the unions, as you said, the Newsom and others support the unions. The unions then become a major source of campaign cash for them, so that you're basically using the taxpayers' money to reward your friends who then help keep you in power. I mean,
this is true. I was going to say with CHIRLA, we found that there was a $500,000 donation. So all of CHIRLA's money comes from the taxpayers, right? To a tune of over $100 million in the last few years, since Gavin Newsom's been in office. And then they gave Gavin Newsom $500,000, a committee opposing the recall of Gavin Newsom. So you see how the system works. We also paid for a multi-million-dollar building for them. It's taxpayer dollars. So when you drill down into this information, it's startling that we are subsidizing the illegal immigrant invasion, if you want to call it that. I mean, I have always been, when I first went to Washington, I was sort of upset when I heard Pat Buchanan say, hey, Jose, get back across the border, right? That was sort of like, ooh, that's uncomfortable.
Pretty crude.
In California, we live with immigrants every day, but it's become a serious problem because all of our schools, our social services are all getting weighed down by this process, and the state has turned completely blue. So, you see some of our state representatives they will brag about coming here illegally. They're legal now, and I'm sure they apply for asylum or they got married and what have you. But this is part of the culture that they're proud of crossing the border. They don't believe in borders. The mascot of these immigrant groups, a lot of them, is a butterfly. You don't have a border at all. So yes, this is Newsom's army of nonprofits. You look at them, there's groups like the Center for Gender and Refugee Studies, the Immigrant Defenders Law Center, Islamic Association of Immigrants. There's one for every minority group, and they're all making money off of this. I mean, there are their salaries, and if they're being honest on their 990s that they have to give to the IRS, their tax papers, some of them are getting extraordinarily high salaries for the amount of money they're even getting from the state.
Right.
Yeah, I would push back a little bit on the quote that Peder had earlier that progressive, the end goal is what they're always focused on. I think it seems like the process is what they're really focused on. And in fact, it's like Chris Rock's joke about the pharmaceutical companies, right? You don't want to cure the disease. You just want to keep giving the guy medicine to manage it. Well, they just want to keep giving money into this system to keep it going. And some of the money, and you talk about this at length early in the book, seems to be coming from China. And this you trace back to when Gavin Newsom was the mayor of San Francisco. What do you think Americans and voters and people should take from that? And, Act Blue now is under investigation for taking in foreign donations. What do you think those connections that Newsom has with California mean for him as he tries to run for president? And what should people be looking for?
I think it's deeply concerning, Gavin Newsom's relationship with China. We're going to have a complete 180 if he is elected with our relationship with China. It is so cozy that this is sort of a microcosm. We looked at one of Gavin Newsom's wineries, and there is a Chinese shipping label, shipping crate with Chinese, language all over it. That is where they do the mixology for the wine. And they brag about it on their website. We are the only winery in Napa Valley, or maybe the world, that has a Chinese shipping label as our crate as our office. Okay, so what's going on there? Well, we found out he's trademarking his wines into China. I like to say he's a sommelier to the CCP because he was actually physically doing tastings with CCP officials and a big real estate tycoon in this fancy restaurant in Shanghai that we talk about in the book. So his China SF was an extension of Dianne Feinstein. She had a group like that, but then she took him over, and Gavin Newsom, like everything he's done while he's in office, he ramped it way up, and it was supposed to get California businesses into China. But really what it was doing was getting Chinese businesses into California. And the telltale sign of this is that he vetoed a bill just a couple years ago that would have banned foreign nationals from buying agricultural land in California. And it was passed by a supermajority of Democrats unanimously.
Right. And you mentioned that the USDA doesn't police that very well, that Newsom said, oh, well, that's already being done. But you said it really isn't.
No, it's not. That was, one of Gavin Newsom's convenient, I mean, he's just fabricating right there. And so this, like you say, I'll give you an example. We funded Solyndra to the tune of $500 million of our taxpayer dollars, right? So, and then Gavin Newsom, this China SF San Francisco group brings in Suntech, which is Chinese solar company. Well, they're a corrupt company. They had all kinds of problems in Italy with the mafia, and they were starting to close down. But they dumped their products on the market, and they undercut Solyndra.
That was a wild story in the book. Yeah, Solyndra, I didn't even know about that Solyndra has a lawsuit.
Yes.
Its own. It has filed suit against, I didn't know any of that. Yeah.
Yeah, we dug into that. So, that's just one memorable. He did that throughout. And he also, it was a very controversial contract during COVID where he brought in this Build Your Dreams. It's an EV company in China. And he visited the company, and that's where he was showboating with those EVs. And he was on their EVs on the Great Wall with his sunglasses and his open shirt, and handshaking President Xi in China. He brought that company over. They got a big contract for PPE in protective equipment, masks mainly, during the middle of COVID. And everybody, even the Democrats in the state legislature were saying, give me the details of that contract. And Gavin Newsom was saying no. So, of course, China, You can say they caused the virus or they prevented it from spreading, and then we're going to give them a huge contract. He's really tight with with a whole host of CCP officials over there because he wants to get his wine into China. I'm sticking with that. I really want to know how much wine he's selling in China because it's not even that prevalent in the stores in California. It's kind of this elite brand, as you can imagine. So there's a lot to that part of the book.
You point out, I mean, I think one of the really interesting things is that this San Francisco entity to bring in Chinese investment spent money to bring these Chinese in. And one of the things that we're learning and that you pointed out is what happens is these companies set up shop and then they steal our secrets. So that it wasn't just that they were doing business here, it's they have entree to the Silicon Valley, to all of this stuff. And a lot of the theft that has made China an even greater competitor for the United States came out of these investments that San Francisco and others made in them. But I want to ask you one more question, and that is, so it's very clear from your reporting that many policies in California don't work, and yet they keep doing it. And it's pretty clear that they keep doing it in part because of the progressive ideology that says, we shouldn't have borders or all homeless people should have a home, even if we can't do it, but also this sort of grift of the NGOs and these people who are, but we still are a democracy. So how do you explain how Democrats keep winning in California? And I mean, one of the things you pointed out that was it was amazing to me, the New York Times actually did a story a couple of years ago that said California is now the leading state in the union for corruption. More public officials have been indicted. And it was interesting. It says now surpassing states traditionally associated with corruption, New York, New Jersey, and Illinois. And what do they all have in common? So how do these people stay in power?
Yeah.
In a democracy where people can vote them out.
Well, I think that there is some tide that's turning. We had Proposition 36 last year when it comes to crime and personal safety, when it starts, what is it? A liberal, a conservative, someone who has been mugged by reality, right? If you get physically mugged, which a lot of our officials have, including Karen Bass's house was robbed, things start, your perspective starts changing. We passed Proposition 36 by 80% of the vote last year. That's a crackdown on this, ridiculous George Gaston and Newsom policy of not, reducing felonies if it's less than 950 to a misdemeanor. So that got pushed out when all the smash and grabs happened across the state. And so, that is a sign of people are deeply concerned. But what I said earlier about the amnesty during the Reagan years, it's entrenched in now, it's a blue state. A lot of the military and the aviation industry that used to keep things, especially in San Diego, a big Navy town, a little bit more even, a little bit more purple, they've flown the coop. And a lot of these big businesses, with this billionaires tax, now, you have Zuckerberg leaving. So, and of course, Elon Musk and several others, we'll see what happens, but it's just becoming more and more progressive. I don't, with this governor race coming up, it's really hilarious to me that the two top candidates consistently have been Republicans, but I don't think that's going to win the day in November. Because the unions will start, and they already are. You see El Gobernador, that's Xavier Becerra, the leading house, the top leadership person in the state legislature, Rivas, is backing him to the hilt. So, I think that we're going to have that. No matter, it's a D behind your name. That's what that's what a lot of people's deciding factor is. They don't pay attention to politics out here. It's a cultural thing. And they just go, okay, who has the D? I'm going to vote that way. And you saw that with Proposition 50 with the gerrymandering. As long as it was anti-Trump, that's what they're going to vote for. And it's 2-1 out here in terms of Democrats to Republicans, and the independents make up about the rest of that fraction. So, I just think it's a foregone conclusion. Is it nice that Steve Hilton's running a great race? I applaud him and Chad Bianco, sheriff of Riverside. But, I'm not that hopeful.
Right.
Well, and, Swalwell to try and make it a little easier.
Exactly. That was all orchestrated, right? And I just think it's about, and you talk to your neighbors, people, if you're conservative, you have to stay in your groups. It's really interesting. People don't talk widely about politics because you will get into in a very, it's frowned upon unless you are progressive to talk about politics in California.
Wow. And it's amazing to me, having read your book, that Gavin Newsom can be seen as a man who could ascend to the White House, ironically, one of the people he might have to vie against is Pritzker in Illinois. And if there's any state that's more troubled than California, it might be Illinois. The flight from reality of just basic results of what government is supposed to do. But on that note, I want to thank you so much, Susan, and I want to wish you the best of luck for your book, Fool's Gold, available at bookstores everywhere.
Yeah, and you don't even need Gavin Newsom's pack to buy it and make it a bestseller.
There you go. Go back.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he didn't say anything bad about the book. So, he said that we were conspiracy theories when it comes to the China connection, but he couldn't contend. He didn't take issue with any fact in the book. It was funny.
Right. Conspiracy theory is the new description of facts you don't like.
There you go.
So, thank you so much. And I want to thank all of you for joining us for this week. As always, please visit our website, RealClearInvestigations.com, to see not only our original work by Jim Varney and our other reporters, but also aggregations of the best investigative journalism from around the country, including Susan and Chris Rufo's new piece from City Journal that's also about California. You can also, as I said, listen to us on Spotify and Apple Music. You can follow us at RC Investigates on Twitter. And until next week, thanks and good luck.